Okay, I see the weight room is empty now, and we're starting to get to our presentation today. And I want to welcome everyone for coming today for another session of our Therapeutic Recreation Virtual Institute. My name is Dan Hindy. I'm the Education Manager here at PRPS, and I take you the first one to welcome you today. Today's presentation is Through the Eyes of the Parent of That Kid with Shelley Harris, CPRP and CPSI. She's also Director of Dover Township Parks and Recreation. And we can get started real. I just give you a couple of logistics, and then Brittany is going to go ahead with the introduction. Again, this is a Zoom meeting. You will have the ability to mute yourself to speak. However, when not speaking, please keep yourself muted, as this will minimize any kind of background noise. Please use the chat box to ask questions or alert us of any concerns that you may have. Like every session in this TRVI, it's approved for 1.5 hours NCTRC credit or 0.1 CEU. During the program and at the end of the program, a link to the Survey Monkey evaluation will appear on your screen. Use that link to complete the evaluation and put in the magic code phrase that will appear during this presentation, and you will be awarded the credit. And there may be times where you would like to speak up, and you can always unmute yourself, but remember, please keep muted if not. And now I'm going to turn it over to Brittany.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you again for joining us. Like Dan had mentioned, Shelley Harris is the Parks and Recreation Director of Dover Township, and that's a Class 2 township in York County, a position she has held since 2015. She received her bachelor's in Recreation and Leisure Administration from York College of Pennsylvania. She lives in Railroad, Pennsylvania with her husband, Brian, and their children, Nathan and Nicholas. So without anything further, go ahead and take over. We're excited for your session.
There we go. Thank you for inviting me. Dan actually saw me do this presentation for the PRPS conference back in the spring and said, please do this again here. And he convinced me to do this one, although it's very busy for us right now this time of the year. But I appreciate the offer there, the extension there, Dan. So thank you for asking me to do this again. I want to say before I start that I need to give you the disclaimer. My degree is in Parks and Rec. I don't have a degree in any type of medical field or social work or anything like that. So the good thing about that is you get to decide the value of what I have to say and see what you think it means to you. I like to say I was trained by experts because I had these two little people who are now big people chasing me around, and they are the ones who taught me anything that I'm going to tell you and things that I have put it forth going forward. So you get to decide the value of it, but please don't take anything I say in place of medical advice from somebody who is considered a professional. So that being said, let me start you with some introduction. Can you see my screen? Is it working?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to start you with some introductions. This is my family, and that's the really cool thing that photos are. I like that where the screen opens up. I'm a theater person, so I like that where that opens up. So anyway, this is my family. There's my husband, Brian, and we have two kids, Nathan and Nick. These are some older pictures of them. They're my little rugrats. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the kids first. So Nathan, he is now 20 years old. He'll be 21 in December, which is mind-boggling to me. He is my space kid. He knows everything about Elon Musk and SpaceX and all that kind of stuff. When he was about 7, he came up to me and said, Mom, you know why we don't travel very far in space? And I said, why? Bud, expecting like a little kid answer. And he said, it's because of oxygen. And I'm like, what do you mean? He said, storage of oxygen. We can't store that in a spaceship to be able to travel that far in space. So what they need to do is find a way to make oxygen with what's in space, and then they can travel farther. And I was not expecting that answer. And I looked at him and I said, well, that's really smart, kiddo. And if NASA hasn't figured that out, you can tell him when you get there. And I get a mom point for that. But he's always understood things that are way beyond him from a very young age. So this is Nathan. He joined the marching band as a sophomore. We weren't sure where his school placement was going to be his freshman year, so it was too late to join the band, but he saw them and said, I want to do that. And he took lessons, learned how to play the tuba, joined the band, and won 3 back-to-back championships. We live in Southern York County, so he marched with the Susquehanna Warrior Band. He also has his mother's sense of humor. That comes from me. And there he is on senior night at band night. And there's more of our quirky sense of humor. He's not afraid to laugh at himself. He finds things funny. He's just an all-around good-hearted kid, smart kid, good like that. That's Nathan. Now, Nick is my 18-year-old, and he is my animal lover. I've never met an animal that has not liked Nick, even people who have dogs that are suddenly say that they don't usually like people. Well, Nick is the exception to that. He is also my gamer. He was watching somebody play a video game on YouTube, and he liked what they were doing. So he taught himself through YouTube videos how to go in and change the coding of a video game. And he updated the game to what he wanted himself. He figured that out on his own. And he's actually dabbling in more of that video game kind of coding now as he's getting a little bit older. But he is funny. He will throw some sarcastic stuff at you and you least expect it. And you're like, whoa, where'd that come from? Well, this is this kid. He likes to pick on me because I sat in a Chick-fil-A parking lot after I sang a church service and I sat in the drive-thru for 5 minutes wondering why I wasn't getting served. Hello, it was a Sunday. And I sat there for 5 minutes not understanding why. So he never lets me live that down. We drive by a Chick-fil-A on Sunday and he'll be like, yo, you want to go there? I'm like, smart aleck kid. That's my kid. So this is Nick. And the reason why I introduced you to them first has to actually do with something somebody said to me in college. So I was an non-traditional student. I went back to college while my kids were in school. And there's pictures of me at graduation, and they were 8 and 6. That little kid there, he's actually like 6, and that he looks younger, but Nick was actually 6 in that picture. And I had a professor named Dr. Whitman. Some of you guys might know Jeff Whitman. And he taught Intro to Therapeutic Rec. And I had to take that. I was a community rec major, but I took the Intro to Therapeutic Rec. And he was talking about the term disabled person and how the terminology was changing at the time I was there. And it wasn't a disabled person, it was a person with a disability. And we were discussing the semantics of why is that important, et cetera. And he had a very, very important thing. He said this to me or to the class, and it stuck with me. It's one of those things that somebody says something and it just doesn't ever leave you. This was one of those things for some reason for me. And I didn't know why until after a couple of years after those pictures there were taken. But he said, you see the person first. And that's just made so much sense, but I didn't realize how significant it was going to be until time moved forward with my kids. But you see the person first, you try to reach that person first. Yes, they may have a disability, but they're still that person inside. So tell you one story. This is actually an old story. So I was a music major. When I first went to college, I wanted to be a music teacher. And I had an injury that I had to stop playing my instrument. So I had to go to physical therapy to try to remedy this to see if I could continue to play. And while I was there, there was a gentleman who was probably, I was like 19, and this guy might have been in his early 20s. And he had had some sort of accident where he had a traumatic brain injury. And he was in physical therapy, and he was almost always there the same time I was. And they had to have 2 people helping him. He was not verbal, and they kind of had conversations over him. And I was sitting across the table, and it bothered me. And at one day, gentleman was wearing a shirt that had a name of a fire station on the shirt. And I recognized it because my dad's a retired firefighter. And I actually knew somebody who grew up close to this fire station. And so the PT people were like, oh, you like fire trucks, blah, 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 talking to him like he's this little kid. And I said, no, and they've thought his shirt was made up. And I said, no, actually, I mentioned it's actually close to York College, at Grantley Fire Station, blah, blah, blah. And the guy pointed at me and actually tried to speak and was basically validating that I was saying something that was accurate about his shirt. He hadn't done that. And these 2 girls looked at each other, looked at me, and I was mad because I was like, they hadn't been talking to him or seeing him this whole entire time. They just felt that he was not there, but in reality, he was there, just couldn't communicate to them the way they needed, the way they expected him to. And I didn't see him ever really after that, or either I stopped or he changed times or whatever, but it really aggravated me because they didn't speak to him like a person. And then there's times when our own family, as our kids were going through the processes I'm going to tell you about, learning about what their differences were, there are many times that my children were described as that kid. Oh, it's that kid, or there's that kid again, whatever. So I think terminology really matters a lot. You need to see the fact that Nick is this amazing kid who loves animals and is gamer. Nathan would never hurt a fly and has a really rich ability of thinking in there, but you got to know how to get it out. So that's why I wanted you to be introduced to them first. So this is the timelines of my kids to give you like the short versions of how we figured out what was going on with them. We'll start with Nathan. Pardon me. Nathan was born premature. He was born at 35 weeks. His first 3 days were rough. For the first 24 hours was rough for both of us. We were both listed in critical condition, but he had a collapsed lung and things like this his first 3 days. And but after the third day, he turned a corner and he started to get better. He spent a whole total of 10 days in the NICU, and then he was sent home. And he hadn't met all of his milestones as he went forward from there. We started noticing differences when he was in kindergarten, that there were learning differences. And I got called into my very first IEP meeting, which I did not know what that was. And yeah, I'll talk about that later. That was unexpected. In third grade, he still was struggling with his learning, and he was diagnosed finally after getting a lot of testing done with double deficit dyslexia. And I'll be honest, I had to Google it. I didn't know what it meant, but he has deficiencies in multiple different types of processing disorders. It doesn't just do letter reversals. He has a lot more going on with that. He has issues with rapid naming and with auditory things too. He actually did not get his full diagnosis until he was a junior in high school when they did reevaluations and such, and they actually diagnosed him with triple deficit dyslexia. So I like to say my kid's so good at dyslexia, he decided to get all of them. He's just ridiculously, he can't show you what he knows. And I found this, I was showing this to Dan before we started. He had to write a paper in high school about, was that like a persuasive speech or something? And this is actually his writing of how he wrote this on his own. And it was about how to, like, should they cut funding to music programs? Like, he had to pick a topic and that he was passionate about. So he wrote a letter. This was not happening in our school, pardon me, but he was pretending. And so to the school board, basically, should we cut funding to music programs? I'm going to try to show this to you, if this will work. This is, let me let it get focused. It says, let's talk about some reasons why marching band is great for kids. One of the greatest parts about band is that anyone can join. Boy, girl, people with disabilities, and more can join. It allows people from different types of groups that may never meet a chance to meet. It gives you exposure to all kinds of people, to the popular, famous girls, to the weird nerds. It gives them a chance to meet friendships that normally would never happen to form. So I'm fluent in Nathan speak, but a lot of teachers, some of the teachers struggled with that, but that's how he types. That's how he words things. It's like, it's very different, as you can see. But I wanted to share that because I just found that as I was cleaning my office, and thought that'd be insightful to see how a brain like his works. So the thought processes are there, but he can't show you on paper how smart he actually is. Speaking he can, but as soon as you have him write, he can't show you without assistance. So let's talk about Nick, with the timeline for Nick. So Nick was born normal, time frame and everything, but by age 2, he wasn't talking. And I had a friend who was another stay-at-home mom like me, who was a nurse, who said I would get this looked into. So we waited till he was about 2.5, thinking maybe he's just a slow talker. Nathan talks a lot like his mom does. So we thought maybe he's just gonna kind of develop a little bit later. So he wasn't talking, and we got services when he was about 2.5. And I'm not sure if this is like this statewide, but where we live, services come to your home before the child turns 3. And then once they turn 3, they can go into the IU program and be able to go off-site. So, pardon me. So he was there. He started services at home around 2.5. But when he was turned 3 on his 3rd birthday, he started the intermediate units preschool program. And he was still nonverbal. He only had about the equivalent of 11-month-old speech. He had a couple words. So they were teaching him sign language. He had a little communication book. We learned that at age 3, he could read, but he couldn't talk. So we were able to make words that he could pull the words, like sight words out. And this is before everybody had iPads. We had a little book with Velcro, and he pulled the tabs out that he wanted and put them on the front so he could tell you what he was trying to say. Now iPads do that, but my kid can say he came from a time before the iPads were available to help. Anyway, he started to talk about 3.5. We started to look into apraxia, but we never got a diagnosis for that because he started talking and it just kind of moved forward. So I don't know if he just was a slow talker or if there was more going on with that. I'm not really sure, but he did start talking at 3.5 and he made up for lost time. It's like ever since. In kindergarten, he got moved to he graduated out of the IU classroom, and went into a traditional kindergarten program. Even without extra therapies, he was ready to go. Well, he got a brand new teacher fresh out of college who wasn't completely sure how to help him, I believe. And Nick is one of those kids where if he's doing something that it doesn't interest him, well, he'll just kind of go do something different. So they found him in the boiler room. And the janitor had to bring him back. They did that twice. They found him walking around outside. They still don't know how he got outside. And he'd get brought back to the classroom. And Nick was in a full day classroom kindergarten program where Nathan had a half day. We were kind of in that process of switching. Kindergarten full day was almost a little much for Nick, but they moved him to an ES classroom because when you throw your shoes at a principal, they don't like that. And so he got placed into an emotional support classroom when he was in kindergarten, which was in a different building. At age 7, he was diagnosed with, at the time it was PDD-NOS, which is now part of the autism spectrum. It's ASD1, also ADHD and anxiety and other separation anxiety and things of that nature. He's got some other diagnoses in there too. But look at the timelines on that. I think that's important. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So we knew something was up with Nick when he was 2, but we didn't get a diagnosis until he was 7. And that doesn't mean that just because we had a diagnosis, we figured it out, because it's autism. That's not the way that works. And Nathan, he was born preemie, so we expected things to go on. And we knew he was learning differently in kindergarten, but we didn't get an actual diagnosis until he was 17. So I'm sorry, 16. So that's a long time to be in the dark about what's going on. So that's why I tied this in this. Why? So if you're working with, I work with kids like in summer camp programs, and you've got a kid that you know something's different with them. You know something's going on, but we're not professionals. We can't diagnose. Well, why don't I have information? So I go back through the med form and I look, see if there's any diagnosis listed. No. Is there any medication maybe I could get a clue from? No. What's going on? So why don't I have any information on here? Well, I think part of it's that timeline. Parents might not know what's going on yet, or they're in the process, or we waited through a whole bunch of, oh, we're not going to worry about that yet. They'll outgrow that. We've heard that many times. Oh, we'll just see, he's a young 3. We'll see what happens when he gets to be a middle-aged 3. And then, okay, he's still not doing it. You know, that's kind of, we heard that a lot, just like give it time, it'll outgrow. So that might be why they're not telling you anything, because they don't know yet. Another thing, the testing process. This took a ton of time. For Nathan, he needed neuropsychiatric testing. I knew there was a processing thing going on early on, but it took us almost 18 months to get that testing completed, which was, I know now, kind of illegal. The way they made me wait way too long for that. But those testing takes time, and it takes processes you have to go through, steps you have to go through, hoops you have to jump through. There also might be opportunity in there for misdiagnosis. We think it's one thing. That happened with Nathan. We had a school psychologist who was convinced that he had ADHD and needed to be put on medication for that, and that would help him learn. It actually was horrible. Medicine for him did not work. And we even had psychiatrists saying, no, this isn't what's wrong. We need to go into more testing. So we had that process before we got our neuropsych testing to help figure out about Nathan's dyslexia.
You able to go
Um,
down the top today?
Pardon? And then the other thing is medication. If the medication route has to come into play, it takes time to get the medications right. Nathan was not a medication kid. We tried it, it didn't work. Initially, I was not a medication fan. I wanted to see what we could do. I was a stay-at-home mom. I was trying to see what I could do at the time, but it got to the point where we said, well, we'll try it. For him, it didn't work because they were going the wrong direction. He didn't have ADHD, but they put him on meds for it. He had a learning disability. For Nick has ADHD. The meds did work, but they needed time to be adjusted. They needed to try this one and that one. This didn't work, or it worked for a while, now it doesn't. So there was a lot of processes to go through before we found something like that worked. And sometimes for us, it was a cocktail. It was more than, he had at one point 2 different medications. Sometimes we could get away with 1, other times 2 to make that work. So all of these things take time, and they might not be revealing anything to you yet because they're still figuring it out. Another thing, I taught preschool before I was here, and there was a lady who had a kid that we knew something was going on. We told mom, we think you should talk to the doctor. Something's going on. We didn't know what. Like I said, we're not experts. And the mom had the kid take it to the doctor and had testing done, came back as an autism diagnosis. She didn't like that. And so she went to a second doctor and she got the same diagnosis and still didn't like that. My kid doesn't have that. My kid doesn't have that. Meanwhile, her kid's still struggling, and there were services available to her child that she was not getting help for because she was convinced this wasn't what it was. I know right when I got switched to another classroom, she was going to a third doctor to get a third opinion. I don't know what happened with that, but there is kind of this embarrassment, pride, the fear, the whole, like, what's going on? I don't know. How could this happen to me? You go through all of that stuff when you're going through this process. And in her case, she couldn't accept reality that her child needed help, and then she was actually not getting him the help he could have been needing. So I think there's some of that too. Parents just don't want you to know because they don't want to admit it to themselves. And then I have some smart friends. My friend Kim also has a child who's on the spectrum, and her son is several years older than my son. So she was going through this process. She was ahead of me in the process. So she told me, she said, Chalet, I was still trying to fix everything after the autism diagnosis and trying to, if I do this, if I do that, if I take out red dye, I was doing all of this. And she told me, she said, Chalet, you need to grieve the child you thought you were going to have so that you can appreciate the child you do have. And that was really hard to hear, but she's smart, because I did have to say, I kept trying to fix it. And with this situation, he's got autism. He doesn't have a strep throat where I can give him medication and he's going to get better. He has autism, which is going to be with him forever. He's got to learn how to adapt and how to adjust to make the world functional for him. So she was actually really, really smart by telling me that, even though it took me, I'll be honest, it took me way too long for me to understand what she was saying. But you have to go through that process of, I thought I was going to have a child who does this, 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 this. It doesn't mean my child can't do those things, but the process of getting there is going to be different. And I have to be realistic in understanding that the path we're going to take is not going to be maybe the path I thought we were going to take. And once I did that, I was able to help my kid in a better way than I thought I could. And I give my friend Kim credit for that because she's smarter than me. So this is one of my first pieces of advice. If you are running programming for people with special needs, know what your limits are. If you're advertising you can handle special needs, make sure you can do that. We had a childcare situation. Nick needed after-school childcare. My job, I needed extra care in the afternoon, and I needed someone who was open a little later because of my time and my work schedule. And we were at the Y, which was at his school, and he loved it. He was doing really well there. But if the Y has this policy that if you're late too many times, you get dropped. And I was late too many times, we got dropped. So we found a new childcare center, and I talked to them, gave him the IEP. I talked about how all of his kind of issues that he has. Oh yeah, we can handle it. We can handle it. Not an issue. Okay, so I trust it, sign him up, we get him enrolled and everything, and things are going okay. But then one day, I don't know what happened, but there was a girl who was left. She was the last girl of the day, and she had like 5 kids. So she was in ratio. None of the kids were teeny tiny. And Nick decided he had had enough of whatever that was going on, and he left the building. The only other person who was in the building at the time, besides this 19-year-old, maybe she was 19, was a person in the admin office who had just had foot surgery. So she was in a boot, and she had one of those little like things you put your knee in so you can like move around without putting pressure on your foot. So she was not somebody who could chase down a child. And this poor girl who was 19 had to decide, do I chase the kid who just left the building? He went out the main door. Or do I, but if I do that, I leave behind all of these other 3 or 4, I think she had 4 other kids. And one of them was like, I think little, like on a preschooler, was the littlest one. And Nick was like in 2nd grade, 3rd grade. She chose to stay with the other kids, but that's a horrible position to put a 19-year-old kid in. She can't make a right decision. So luckily for us, Nick got outside the door, and then there was like a vestibule kind of area, like, well, it was rent out directly outside, but there was like a covered porch area, and another parent was coming in at the exact same time. Pretty much he got out there. So he didn't get beyond that porch area or into the parking lot or the busy road that was then on the other side of the parking lot. And so that parent brought him back in. And then I was like 3 or 4 minutes behind that. So I was a little bit upset by the time I got there, because I'm like, you guys told me you could handle this child. I told you one of his things he could do is elope. That's one of the things he has done, is he's left spaces. Oh, and they told me they could handle it. Well, they said that they basically cut us from service because they said that he was too much of a risk factor, but I had explained all that to him. Was he wrong? Absolutely. But why they would have one person on staff and not have a second person around when you know you have a child that could possibly leave the space, or how the child got out at all, there was a lot of questions on there. So we ended up, they dropped us, and we found another center that I ended up actually working at, where I taught preschool. But and that center did close down probably within a month after that. There was other issues going on there besides the issue we had. They just weren't functioning very well, and they ended up closing down. So if you say you can handle kids with special needs, be sure that you know what that means. Train your people, know what all of that means. Require that they have, I know these titles have changed recently. I don't know what the new titles are because my kids don't get these services anymore, but the TSS, the therapeutic staff support, and the BSC, which I don't think I ever behavioral, can't remember what that stands for, but that's something that they can get if they have medical assistance. They can get TSS services, so they have a one-on-one person to help them. Require that, so that you have that extra set of eyes on that child. Now that person cannot be a babysitter. They have rules of what they can and can't do, but having an extra set of eyes on a child is always a good thing. Ask for the IEP if they're willing to give it to you. They don't have to, but they might. And then you can try to match what the school's doing, what the parents are doing, and then what you're doing, so this child has consistency. My child needed that consistency. When we had that straight across the board, he thrived. When we had variations, he didn't. He struggled. Train your staff, plain and simple. And plan for that what if. What if you have the eloper, like mine was? My child was not a hitter or a biter. That wasn't his thing, but there are kids that do that. There are some that self-harm. He only had one instance where he tried to hit his head on the floor. With him, we were lucky with that. But be prepared for those what if moments. So this poor 19-year-old girl isn't stuck going, what do I do? She didn't know what to do. Another topic I like to talk about, this is my observations between a difference between a meltdown and a tantrum. Nick had lots of meltdowns, and there were lots of times that people said that he was having tantrums. And I didn't agree with that, because I think there's a difference between the two, and I know a lot of people agree with this. So these are my observations alone from working preschool and watching my own kid. So this is what I think a tantrum is versus a meltdown. Sorry, hold on. Tantrums are the kid that says, like, I want what I want when I want it, which is now, and you're going to give it to me, which we see that a lot in toddlers, preschoolers. I saw it a lot when I taught 4-year-olds, and sometimes in high schoolers. I was one of those kids that if I didn't get what I want when I was in high school, I probably had a little tantrum too. But I noticed that those types of kids, when they're having that tantrum, they followed me, especially when I taught preschool. They would follow me either physically around the room because they knew I was going to give them permission to do what they wanted, or they're going to follow me with their eyes. And so that was my kind of thing that I was observing. I was like, all right, this is weird. And it seemed to happen anytime a kid was having a tantrum, Same thing happened for me. Whereas the meltdown for Nick, this was different. It was sensory initiated, especially when he was younger. It was sound. He would throw his hands on his ears when a fire truck went by and sometimes drop to the floor. It would just be too much for him. Or I'd have to warn him before I flushed a toilet in a public restroom because they're loud. So he could put his hands on his ears so he could be prepared, because one time he dropped to the floor and had a meltdown in a public restroom, not the best place to do that. So I learned that real quick to warn him before I flushed the toilet if we were out at the grocery store or something. So his meltdowns could have been sensory initiated, which usually for him was sound when he was younger, or he didn't like to be touched back here on the back of his neck. That could put him into a meltdown. Or it was an event specific. Something happened and it kind of overwhelmed his senses. He didn't know how to deal with it and he would have a meltdown. And that was really what it felt like. It almost was like watching a panic attack in an adult, like where they just kind of lose control of being able to do anything. It was kind of like watching that with him. He wouldn't focus on me. He would sometimes his eyes would be slammed shut, or he would be in a distance, like he's not here, like he was somewhere else, like he wasn't there with you. And he didn't ever feel safe. You could tell he was like getting panicky, and he was sometimes rocked, and he would become very overwhelmed with the emotions that he was experiencing, and he didn't know how to deal with them. He did not have that ability in his system of how to process that. So he would go into this meltdown mode, which in some cases looks like a tantrum, but for our situation, it was very, very, very different. He really just didn't seem safe. That seemed to be the big thing. So this is what I did to help Nick. First thing I would do is I'd get down to his level. If he was on the floor, I was on the floor. And now this one, the bear hug, I'm old. I was trained back in the old days of how to, I worked in inner city in York with Y kids. We were taught how to do a full body restraint with the arms and then how to drop them to the floor. I know some people don't teach you that anymore. So, but I'm mom, I could do this. And the bear hug worked for him. If I just came up behind him and just hugged him tight, so he knew where he was, that sometimes was enough to help bring him back, calm him down, to help him regulate. This was before the weighted blankets were a big thing, but that would have been something that maybe could have helped him too. They weren't really around when he was younger. I had to stay calm because I learned whatever I gave him, whatever emotion I gave out, he gave back to me 10 times over. So if I came into it panicky, he would be panicky. If I came into it angry, he would get angry. So I had to be calm, and I would do slow breathing. This was both for me and for him, but I would do like breathe with me, and I would do slow breaths in, diaphragmatic breaths, slow breaths out, like that. And this was partly to calm me down, but also to help calm him down because he was in overload. And I would say him to things, breathe with me, you're safe, I'm here. I would even say, come back to me. Sometimes I would have to say that because he was gone. Like I couldn't even see him in there. I would not talk about what happened to cause the meltdown until I was able to get him to even formulate words. I would have to just kind of focus on getting him back to me. And I wouldn't talk about being mad at him or like talking about they're scolding him or whatever. My primary goal is to bring him back. And then once I could feel him relax, now sometimes I wouldn't have to bear hug him this whole time, but just lay with him and like stroke his back. But as he was coming back and I would see him start to relax a little bit more, sometimes he would sit up, but he'd still be like crying and still be upset. And then I would try to talk about things that are in the room to kind of bring him back to where we were in the room. So we played a lot of I Spy when he was little, so we played that. So one time we were in a room in the school that had flowers painted on the wall. So I said, I spy 3 pink tulips, and there was actually 4. So he would say there's 4, and I would slowly get him to talk to me. And then once I started getting him to talk some more, that's when I would find out what caused him to get stuck in the first place. Once we found out what that was, sometimes it was something that happened that day, or right before the incident. Sometimes he was thinking about something that happened 2 days ago and it overwhelmed him and he melted down. So you never knew for him what caused it until after he was kind of back into his reality, and then you could talk to him. We talked about his decisions that he made, good and bad, like, you know, what and how he could work through it, what he could have done differently. That's when I started to talk to him about, okay, we couldn't process this before the bad stuff happened, but now we're going to process it with me now. So I would sit with him and we talk about it and talk about good choices and bad choices, etc. And then once he was back completely and talking, if he had made a mess, we cleaned it up. He was not like a go hit somebody or go bite somebody, but if there was stuff on his desk, he would push it and it would fly. And if you were close by, you might get hit in a crossfire, but he was not somebody who would go after and pound on some other kid. So he usually made a mess, flipped his desk over or something. So we always cleaned up what he did so he can set it back right. For us, sometimes these meltdowns were quick. There was some, you had one that was like lasted for several hours. And it was that one we ended up at the hospital. That one was going to crisis in an ambulance in a straitjacket. That one was not pleasant. It was the last day he was in public school before he went to a special emotional support class, therapeutic emotional support classroom. That was our worst situation with us. Now, interesting for Nick, he is diagnosed with autism and he has a medical diagnosis of autism. Our school district does not recognize it as an autistic diagnosis because there's a difference between an educational diagnosis of autism and a medical one. They, at the time when he was going through school, the autism classroom placements that they had, he was too high functioning for. So they felt the best way they could help him was to put him in an emotional support classroom where they could try to address the meltdowns and such, and try to put him out into traditional classroom spaces as much as they could to include him in that. But he didn't, it was always too much for him. He did need to go to an intensive, like a therapeutic emotional support classroom where he was not with the general population. He was in a classroom of other kids that had other similar challenges. I don't know what those kids' challenges are, but he was not in a public classroom. So these are other things that we did to kind of help us get through tough situations. Distractions, that's where I show you my toys. One of the biggest things for us that Nick didn't do well with was waiting for anything or change. Those are his two big things. So these are some things that we would use. This is a game called Name It, which I don't think they make anymore. My mom found this, and in here, there'll be things like name different types of games, vegetables, etc. And so they would just have to sit and think and come up with different names of things. So while we were waiting for food at a restaurant or waiting in line for something, I would pull this out of my pocketbook. You can see it's very well worn. We've used these a lot. And we would just go through and name things. There's things in here that are silly and whatnot. You can actually recreate this. I don't believe you can find it for sale anymore, but you could easily recreate this and come up with different things or just brainstorm them to help occupy them. Another thing we did was would you rather books. I have boys, so they love the gross stuff. So there's questions in here like, would you rather be the size of an ant or the size of a blue whale? And you would talk about them. Would you rather fart out of your nose or pee through your belly button? I have boys. This is the kind of stuff we talked about when they were little. So, and these would just create silly conversations. And sometimes other people waiting in line with us would join in and play along, which the parents were happy because then I was occupying their children too. We would play I Spy. We did that a lot. Mad Libs. You guys remember Mad Libs, where you have to come up with all the fun words and such like that. We would play, I'm not going to play this with you today but I'm going to show you. This is an app I have on my phone. It's an Ellen game. It's called Heads Up. And when the game's, no, come back here. Help if I do it right. You put the game on your forehead and it's going to give clues, or you have to get me to say that. So firefly. So I would say lightning bug or something, and I get me to say firefly. If I got it right, we move on. There was a Marvel movie with it was in Wakanda, it's black, blank, panther, something like that. So you play these games. We would play this in line at Disney World and stuff like this. This is like a 99-cent app that you can get on your phone, and we would entertain people in lines for whatever. But that was a great fun thing to have. We always seem to have I try to have so many different tricks up my sleeve to kind of help, because some days I Spy wouldn't work, but Would You Rather might. And other days, Would You Rather wouldn't work. So I had to have things constantly changing. There's this was a toy we got from Chick-fil-A. It's a 5-second rule game where you have to like name 3 things of winter clothing within 5 seconds. But there's also another app on your phone called the 7-second challenge. And you have to do whatever the task is on the card within 7 seconds, and you record yourself, and it's a challenge you can play. We did that too to help occupy each other. So those are fun things that we did. Transition time was another tough time for Nick and both kids actually. So I would have to prep them constantly. Number one, I use a timer because the timer became the bad guy. Someone told me this a long time ago, and it's so right. The timer becomes the bad guy instead of me. So I'll say I'm setting the timer. I would give my kids 15 minutes. So before we had to leave to go into something else, I'd say I'm giving you 15 minutes, and I would give them updates every 5 minutes. That's what my kids needed to process to be ready to go, like to leave or whichever. And then when the timer went off, they knew it's time to go. And they didn't fight with me anymore because the timer it wasn't me, it was the timer. Nick also did really well with a visual schedule. When he was in preschool, his preschool teachers really understood him, and they made centers that were shapes. So he had a little schedule by his cubby, and he might start with green triangle, go to red circle, and then go to blue square. So he knew where those stations were, and he had his schedule, and they always stuck to that. If they ever changed it without prepping him, that could cause a meltdown, especially when he was younger. He got better with that as he learned coping skills as he got older. But whatever your schedule is, don't change it on them without all kinds of prep as much as you can. That will help. Excuse me, stay calm. I talked about this before. Kids constantly, I've learned this any place I go, whatever I bring to them, they give it back to me tenfold. So I try to be as calm and as positive as possible. I tried to, not during meltdown times, but any times, talk about books that had feelings in them or experiences. There's a whole series, I forgot that book. There's a whole series of books called the Serendipity series by the Cosgroves that were written in the 70s, I think into the early 80s. And they have all kinds of different great stories that talk about virtues and different things like that. Those were things I read to my kids, but there's more than just those. There's tons of books out there, but it was good for me to try to read them about things about feelings and about how to process things and how to handle situations when they weren't in the situation. So when they got to the situation, that it would help them try to recall that so they could work through it. That was kind of another de-escalation technique with him too. I would try to talk about breathing and how to help him deal with it. Like before a meltdown would happen, I'm like, okay, you got yourself through that. What did you do? And we would talk about it and try to help teach him. And because for whatever reason, that part of him wasn't developed. We had to help him develop that. You can't possibly learn enough, my opinion. One other thing that from a discipline standpoint, somebody recommended this book to me, 1, 2, 3 Magic. I didn't do this one 100% completely, but I really, really enjoyed this book. A teacher recommended this to me, and we did a slight variation of this with discipline with the kids, and it worked fantastic. And for Nathan read this book with my mom called The Gift of Dyslexia. My mom read it to him one summer, and after that summer, I had a changed kid because he understood that being dyslexic isn't a curse. It actually has benefits that seem to really weigh positively in what he wants to do. He actually wrote a paper in high school about the day I realized I wasn't stupid. And it was because he read this book with my mom. And he wrote I don't have that paper with me, but he wrote a paper talking about when he realized that all the things that he was told when he was younger, he always assumed he was stupid. And he wasn't. He just learns different. And that's what this book did for him with my mom reading that. So the red, yellow, green light situation that's listed here, we had a problem with this. So I want to say, if you use this in a school setting, this is the thing where you have a stoplight and the kids' names are all on clothespins, and they're supposed to all start on green. And if they do something wrong or make a bad choice, they move to yellow. That's like their warning. And if they do another thing badly or don't make another poor choice, they move to red. And then maybe there's a punishment for that, or maybe that's the call home or something. It's a visual representation of that behavioral chart. Well, Nick's teacher, I think this was in 2nd grade, said to him in front of him one day, well, why should I even move this kid back to green? He's just going to be in red. She said that in front of him. And now he's got an autism mind. He heard that literally. And he said, well, she thinks I'm bad. I'm going to show her what bad is. So she got a real fun kid for a period of time until we had this conversation and learned what had happened. And then she had to address it. She didn't move him back to green. She just left him on red because she figured he'd be there anyway. So he never got a chance to reset his day and try again and make a better choice. She just skipped that process for him. And then she had a real bad experience. Part of me was like, well, that's what you get for that. But so if you're going to use a red, yellow, green light system, follow the rules of that system, please. And the bucket fillers, that's another thing that people do for behavioral recognition. When I taught preschool, when I first started, I was co-teaching with a teacher who did the bucket fillers, which there's a little bucket paper, construction paper bucket on a bulletin board. And when the kid does something good, there's like a communal bucket of water that they get, and it gets put into their bucket. Then at the end of the week or the end of a time period, if you have so many pieces of water in there, you can earn a reward. Well, this teacher would take it away. The child made a poor choice. She'd go up to their bucket and take it out. I didn't like that. I didn't like how you see the kid, how it made them feel. And so I came up with an alternate strategy that I'll show you on the next page. And there's that 3-2-1 magic book that I showed you. I jumped ahead there. I think it's important to say that the child may make a bad choice or poor choice, but they are not bad. So be careful when you're speaking to the kids, what words you use, they will hear them. When Nathan was in 7th grade and we were trying to get the neuropsych testing done because we knew there was something going on, we were in a psychiatric evaluation, and then in the bulk part of the meeting, it was me, Nathan, the school team, and the psychiatrist. And the school psychologist said in front of my son, who was 7, maybe 7 or 8, she said he was the worst case she'd seen in 30 plus years of her experience with education, whichever. And she was trying to say that she wanted the help from the IU to do more testing to figure out what's going on, because everything they were trying wasn't working. And I knew what she was trying to say. They were kind of at their limit of what they could do, and they needed help. My kid, when we're walking out to the car, says, "Mom, why does that lady think I'm the worst kid ever?" And I had to explain to him, "Bud, she doesn't think you're the worst kid ever. We just know your brain learns differently than other kids, and we need help trying to figure out how to make that work so you can move forward the way that we need you to move forward." I had to explain it to him what this professional meant. So be careful what you say. These kids hear them. And he held on to that until he was in high school and wrote his paper about how he knew he wasn't stupid anymore. So he thought he was stupid from the time he was 7, probably a little before that, all the way till he was like 16, 17 years old, because that lady said that to him. So be careful what you say to these kids. So this is what I did for this is when I taught 4-year-olds preschool. This was my behavioral chart alternative. I'm a Harry Potter geek, so I called this Diagon Alley. And it's a big game board. And all of the kids started at a spot kind of here. I don't know if you can see this, in this area. We took pictures of all the kids, laminated them, and made them into little game pieces and used sticky tack. This was on the wall above our circle time area and close to where we had lunch and snack. And they all started on this beginnings part of the board. And anytime we caught them doing something good, we would make an announcement in the classroom. "Oh, Ryan cleaned up the toys without me asking. I'm going to move a spot." And I would move a square on the board. And anytime they landed on a colored square, they'd earn a prize. The cool thing about this was that they could never move backwards, because I told them if they make a good choice and they do something good, that's theirs forever. They get to keep that and they get to own that forever. So they never move backwards on the board. Some kids moved quicker on the board than others did. Some kids weren't with us all day, so they didn't move as fast because they just weren't there all day. But this kind of evened that playing field out. Sometimes the kids lapped the other kids, but it worked. When we started this, we had a couple, we used timeout. We did have stuff like that. Once we started this, I don't think we put anybody in timeout after this started. It took about a week before everybody kind of got into it. And it got to the point where kids in the older 3s that they were having troubles with that were getting ready to move up to us anyway, they moved them up early and they put them into our system, and we were able to work out that issue with the kids, and we had behavioral issues just went away. So it worked too well that they maxed our classroom out maybe, but it worked for us. And we also did a second thing where we had a number grid 1 to 100. So I took, and it was dry erase, it was laminated. So I took 100 popsicle sticks, and I wrote 1 to 100 on each of the popsicle sticks and put them into like a coffee can face down. And anytime the whole group did something good, like we walked to outside to go play, you can see we were on the second floor. We had to go downstairs past the babies. If we were able to do that without waking anybody up and being a problem, we could pull a stick and we'd identify the number, color that in on the board. And anytime we got a bingo basically on our board, we got a group prize. So we had a high ceiling in the roof of this is an old church. So we had a high ceiling. So one day we brought the bounce house inside in the wintertime and we had a bounce house day because the kids earned it. So this worked fantastic. So feel free to steal, call it whatever you want. Now kind of switching gears to what I do for my regular job. I'm a Parks and Rec director. So I was trying to think about ways that I could engage families with kids with special needs to our events. The very, very first week that I started this job, it was Easter. So I started on a Monday and the event was all set up, but I had to run an event that Saturday for Easter egg hunts and it rained. So we had to do it inside. We have a big like bingo hall community building, but it was so loud and crowded and hot and overwhelming that I thought there's no way in the world my kid could have done this ever. And so that started me thinking of how can I make this event friendly for kids with challenges. So, and I was thinking like, we didn't go to events like that because there were too many people. It was too loud. Nick really had sensory issues with sounds when he was younger. I knew it was going to be a problem. And when we went to places like that, and if he had a meltdown, people stared at us. And so I knew what these families were facing because I went through that myself. So we didn't go to places like that when they were little because we knew Nick couldn't handle it. So I understood why people weren't coming with special needs kids to our events because of that experience. But those people, they're part of our community. Why can't they have fun and play with us too? So that got me thinking, and how can I change our event and modify it so that people can feel comfortable coming to it. So our Easter egg hunt, there's a picture, that's our toddler group for our normal Easter egg hunt. And it's overwhelming for anybody, let alone a child who's got some special stuff going on. So we had over 1,000 kids that usually come to our egg hunt for the ages 0 through 9, plus grandmas and moms and dads and aunts and everybody else. It's too much going on. My son actually came to help with that event in that picture. And Nick was probably 14. It was still too much for him. There's a walking track there. He had to walk the track because it was too much sensory overload for him. So if it was too much for him at 14, imagine what it would have been for him at 2 or 3. So I was like, how can I make this work for our community and help everybody? So I went to some people, I reached out to some people. I was in some special needs groups on Facebook. And so I asked them, I reached out to other people who had kids in similar situations. And there was a group called Autism New York. I reached out to them, thought about our challenges with Nick, and this is what we came up with. We designated a special time for special needs. Now I call it special needs because our community understands this and they respect this. I know there's discussion on whether that term is relevant or it should be used. We use it because our community understands it and we're moving ahead with it. So I realized with us, I couldn't make the Easter egg hunt look less people. I couldn't possibly do that. So I wasn't going to be able to include, I was going to have to make a special time for the special needs kids to come or people to come. So we did a different time. Our traditional egg hunt started at 10. So we started our special needs hunt at 11:30, which gave us time to clear those people out and have less people. And so we limited the number of kids to 50 because I wanted to make sure that the families felt comfortable. There wasn't going to be too much stimulation going on for the kids or the people who came. We do a traditional just an egg scramble with our normal egg hunt. So we did that same thing. I didn't want to change what we do. I want to make sure we did the same offering. So we did our egg scramble. And then I thought, what about a child who's in a wheelchair? Or what if they can't get down onto the grass to get an egg? So we have a walking trail at this park. So we made a bunny trail. And I got volunteers to hold Easter baskets. You can see the Girl Scouts there. They kind of adopted this. This is their thing. They come every year to help. but they would go down the trail and have 12 volunteers where they could get an egg from that volunteer for the people along the bunny trail. And then I also had an option. So even if this was still too much for a family, for the child, they could have an individual egg scramble. I had a volunteer in another part of the park that was off to the side that they could take the eggs, throw them out into the grass, and that family could do the egg hunt by themselves. And every year we've done this, we've had one family, different family each year, that it has been too much for their child. They needed that ability to do it on their own. So I'm glad we had that option available for them. So here's an example of what we used to do we haven't had Easter for 2 years now, thanks COVID, but this is what we did 2 years ago. You can see kind of how our timelines started. And we still had special prizes for people with special needs. Just like we did everything else the same, we just gave them their own time so they feel a little more comfortable. So here's pictures of our 2018 event, which was the first time we did it. And they're so cute. We did not have an age limit on it because we felt if this was something, if there was an adult with special needs that could benefit from this program, we wanted them to be able to attend. So we did not put an age limit on it. So this is 2018. Oh, I'm sorry, that was the second year. This is 2017. This is the first year that we did it. In 2019, we had a rain date and changed location, and I didn't get pictures of it. So these are the things we had to do extra. We needed more eggs. We had to get more candy to fill those eggs. And so we needed more time to fill those eggs. I had to get a couple more prizes. So a couple more staff hours to deal with that, longer day for the event day. And I needed more volunteers. Now for that bunny trail, I had 12 stations with Easter baskets. So I had to buy those Easter baskets. That was an additional cost, but now I have them. I posted on Facebook asking for volunteers. I had them all within an hour. And that was crazy. But I had people just coming out of the woodwork who wanted to be people with the baskets along the trail. And it was completely worth it. Here's the benefits. This one was mine because I watched this each year. You see the parents come and they're nervous because they don't know what's going on. They aren't sure what's happening. And you see them, their tension. And then as things are starting to go and we're explaining what's going on, you can actually see them start to relax because they know they're around other people who get it. And they know that we're trying to help their child, and they're not, if their child has an outburst, no one's going to care. You know, it's not, people aren't going to give them that critical stare that, why did they bring that child out? I've heard that before about my kid in a public spot. Why would they bring this kid out there? Well, this kid doesn't have a chance. Why does it deserve to go like look for Easter eggs either? Because my kid's not perfect. No, so you can see them visibly relax. You can see the tension leave their shoulders. It was just great because we had some parents who said they tried the event the year before and it was too much for their child. And when it was over everybody, they tried it. It was just, they were so happy that we did the smaller group so their kid could participate. We allowed the adults to participate too. So we were hitting that crowd. So anybody with a disability was able to attend. I got more thank yous from this event than I've had for any other event I've ever done, ever. Volunteers were thanking me for being a part of it. That doesn't happen. So that was great. It was the people who were volunteer. I had a lady who her daughter attended the regular egg hunt. She was like in 4th grade. And then she came and stuck around to do the volunteering for the special needs. And she said, thank you so much for this opportunity to show my child how to help the community and how to be a part of her community. So it was truly rewarding. But the girl in the grass is the best story. So our first year we did this, there was a mom who had a little girl who she had mobility issues, but she could walk. She was in a wheelchair. And mom took her out and sat her on the grass, and it was a beautiful spring day in Pennsylvania. It was warm, it's gorgeous. The grass was lush and pretty, and the birds were chirping. It's like perfect day. Sky was blue, and mom sat this girl in the grass to get eggs. And what does she do? She runs her fingers through the grass, and she gets this sheer joy look on her face of just radiates pure joy. And I just happened to be looking that direction when it happened, and I got choked up. And I looked at my coworker, who's also a friend of mine, and I said, we caught eyes, and I don't know if she was feeling the same thing I did, but I was like, I just can't. And I had to walk away and let the tears go, because there was a moment I was able to give that family that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And it was like, that's when I knew that there was some other crap we had to deal with earlier in that day with people being just dumb. And that right there was completely fixed everything. Just to see that moment and just see the pure joy on that little kid's face. It was just, I can't explain it. That's like one of my highlights of what I've done here. So that's what we did with Easter. We also have a Halloween event that we haven't been able to implement this since COVID. We haven't been able to get back into doing this yet. I haven't figured out how to make it work quite right in COVID times yet. But what we did for our Halloween in the park, we have a trunk or treat. And so we advertised that the trunk or treat was going to be from, I think, 3 to 6 or 4 to 6, 4 to 7 or something. Whatever time we advertised, that we put in the descriptors that the hour before everything started was going to be for our friends with special needs. And we did that so that people could skip the line, because we have a lot of people who come to that event. It's a lot of line waiting. So it would eliminate that part of the challenge. And those people could come in and go through the trunk or treat areas and see our face painters and other things like that prior to the big lines getting there. 3 to 6, there it is. I can't read. Anyway, so that was our verbiage. This event runs for 3 to 6 and includes a trunk or treat, arts and crafts, face painting, magic shows, blah, 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 blah. Everything is free, but donations are appreciated. Special needs, families with children with special needs are invited to come at 2 p.m. for a more sensory-friendly experience. All activities will be available except the bubbles. He actually started early, so they got to do bubbles too. And I was really nervous that people were going to see that in the description and cut the line and come early. And I was really afraid that we were going to have people just be ignorant and do that. And that's not what happened. They respected our special needs hour. We had one family who got there early. They wanted to be the first people in line for this thing that started at 3. And they were our line jumper hunters. They would stand there and be like, you get over here, line's over here. They would make sure that nobody jumped the line so that the special needs families could get in there and enjoy this at much quieter pace. So we had additional people come. This picture, the newspaper showed up and took photographs, and that picture, that gentleman, we've seen him come to some of our events. He's just a really cool dude and he really likes Scooby-Doo. Our vendors that we had on site and our trunk or treat people were so happy to be able to provide this, to be able to open that earlier hour, to be able to be a part of this. Again, thank yous out the wazoo for it. And you feel good. You really feel good about it. And so I can't say enough about how much it has helped us to be able to do that. So anyway, that's me. That's it. That was all. So if you have questions now, I'd be more than happy to answer them, but thank you.
Thank you. That was awesome. I just wanted to share, one way we learned how to adapt our Easter egg hunt for people using wheelchairs, because all of our residents use wheelchairs here, and I'm sure other people have done this as well. We're tying balloons to the eggs, and the eggs weighed them down, but then people could just grab the string and kind of pull up and catch the eggs. So keep that one in your back pocket. The residents really, really liked that. So, and then I don't know if you got a chance to check in the chat. Leanne was saying that so many of these techniques, the techniques that you went over worked for it with their long-term care folks. Everyone said, thank you for sharing, very good information, as well as very inspiring. That's awesome. Yeah, I was feeling, even when you were talking about how to be careful about what you're saying in front of the kids, that's also applicable in our setting as well, because I think a lot of nurses, or, we just start talking, especially our people who have dementia, they think, oh, they're not going to remember, oh, they're not paying attention, but they hear that for sure. And it definitely impacts. So I'm glad you brought that up. I thought that was a really good point.
If anybody, forgot to mention this earlier, but so I'm kind of an expert now of IEP meetings, but for my very, very first one, I didn't even know what IEP meant. So, which is an individualized educational plan. And I think that if you have terms like that, where it's IEP, which I know what that means, but does everybody know what that means? Probably not. If you're going to have terminology like that, explain to people what that is. I did not know what to expect. I came into my very first IEP meeting for Nathan. I was the only person on my side of the table because my husband couldn't get off of work. There were 10 people from the school on the other side. It was a principal, a new assistant principal had just started, who was kind of learning the ropes. It was a teacher. It was his classroom teacher, a co-teacher. It was a school psychologist. It was 2 different special ed teachers I had never seen before, a speech therapist, occupational therapist, and a physical therapist. There was a total of 10 people. And I was automatically on like, oh my God, what happened? What is wrong with my child? So I think that anything you can do, it might be your 10th IEP meeting of the day or the week, but it's that family's first. And this was the first time I was ever being told that something might be wrong with my child. So it was very overwhelming and very not family friendly, if I will. I mean, our school district has had a lot of challenges with special needs. We've kind of gone through the growing pains of that. We started with a lot of problems, and then we're happy where we are now. My son is he's a super senior. He's eligible to be in his classroom until he's 20. He'll be 22 because of where his birthday falls, if we keep him in there that long. But anyway, be careful with that. And I also had a teacher, a school psychologist, say not in front of my child that my child, if he didn't improve by a certain time, would be considered unteachable. So if you talk about that stuff behind closed doors, don't talk about that stuff in front of a parent, because I about lost my what that day. And I knew she was going to be the one who okayed testing that I needed for my kid to find out what was going on. So I bit my tongue and real hard, probably drew blood, because I wanted to jump across that table and tell her what I really thought, but I didn't. And so just be cautious, because you're not only talking to the kid, but also the parent, and or in a senior environment or whichever. You're right. The gentleman I was with at the physical therapy, they thought he was nonverbal, and he understood everything they were saying to him. And I would have been mad too, because they were talking to him like he was a 3-year-old kid, and he was completely there. He was just stuck. So.
Go
ahead. Well, I just wanted to thank you. This is a great presentation. I'm a recreation therapist, and I've done inclusion services and helped parks and recreation departments, how to include all kids. Is the ADA, a lot of the parks and rec departments, they kind of forget that, it's an ADA, but, and I've worked with so many parents who are at the very beginning, like you were at one time, and that friend of you who were able to step up and say, look, you got a little denial going on here, and it's because you're grieving. And having when you work through the grief process and you go through that denial and that depression, and I'm sure you went back and forth at milestones, Nick's not getting a driver's license perhaps or whatever, and you go back and forth through the grief process through your whole life. But the wonderful thing I see with you is that you've gone through the grief process, and you're at the acceptance, and you're at the empowerment stage. And so many families that I've worked with throughout the years, they get stuck. They're stuck in anger, and they're bitter, and they're not willing to reach out, or they're just so depressed they can't do anything for their child. So hats off to you as a mom and as a professional. You've come through the process, and you're now empowered. And I love your sons. I love your family. And it's hard to do what you just did, but hats off to you.
Thanks.
And Chalet, I can echo that. Before I was working for PRPS, I was the head of a school for a school, and sat in on a lot of those meetings. And like you said, in the early grades, everybody's hoping that things will straighten out, or and when they don't, I know parents, and I had a hard time. Parents have a difficult time accepting that sometimes, and you really have to be sensitive and give people the space, to do that. And I can see that simple tenet applying to people who are facing dementia and those other things. When they're in those lucid moments, that to be going through something like that also.
It was very hard to hear my friends say that, because I hadn't thought of it that way, because this is my child, my responsibility, et cetera. And my job was to make it right and make him okay. And it was hard to understand that his version of okay is just fine. This is him. And he's an amazing child. And it doesn't mean he can't do great things. He just has to go about doing them a different way. And we had a longer process to get there. But I did go through, and it still cycles around. He's not driving. He's not interested in that. He doesn't trust himself to drive. So we are respecting that. Maybe one day he will, but right now we're kind of following his lead. And he does not have a desire to get into a vehicle and drive. But you'll go through that. You'll see friends and kids who have kids that are quote unquote normal or neurotypical or whatever the buzzword is now. And they'll meet these milestones and they'll do these things and you'll see them achieve things and you want to be happy for them. But at the same time, you do go through a why me. And that is a challenge. And then we had a very, very difficult time with our school district. So we did not get a good support system. I really don't think that there's a lot of help out there for parents who are new to this experience, or of whatever the experience is. I have 2 kids with special needs that are both very different from each other. And they give you the little packet and you have to sign that you got your packet. But it was funny because it's like the safe procedural safeguards or whatever, they had references in there to help you, but a lot of them were not functioning. Like they were functioning statewide and then they lost their funding, so they weren't around anymore. So there were a lot of times references they would give you that didn't even work. So you'd have to go find your own reference points. So there's a lot of opportunity there, I think, for education to help parents navigate through the process. But I also think that from our experience, a lot of times educators didn't listen to what we had to say. We found that the most progress we ever made was when we were consistent with everything with him, from home to school to services, TSS, whatever. When we had a consistent plan, we made the most progress. So whenever we didn't have that, that's when we struggled the most. So if you're ever in a situation where you can influence that, you know, that can be just, what I'm here to do, is trying to help show people that there's ways you can help these families and help this kid particularly get through it. I mean, he's pretty darn, he's an awesome kid and he's moving right along. I don't think he has any residual PTSD from this kind of stuff, but I will say, going by the elementary school where he had a lot of challenges, they did a lot of things that were very inappropriate there. I've learned later, he still can't drive by that school without he'll get fidgety going near the school because they did things that were probably illegal with how they dealt with him, because they didn't understand how to help a child with autism. They just kind of assumed he was lashing out and was just a bad kid. So there was a lot of lack of knowledge of how to help him. So their way of dealing with him was to put him in a room with a carpeted floor and close the door and say, you can't come out until you're calmed down. And he didn't know how to calm down. So he gets nervous around that school, but we're in a good place now. And I think I have more of that residual crap than he does. So anyway, but so just be careful. There's a lot of ways you can hurt these kids, and ways you don't know you're doing, things you don't even know you're doing.
I really want to point out one more thing, and it's kudos to you again. When I'm working with the families, I'll do an RIP, a recreation individualized plan, because hiring counselors for summers, whether they're working summer camps or doing inclusion services or whatever, the worst counselors, and you're out there in education, you're going to pounce on me, but the worst counselors were from the education school systems, because they knew education. They did not know how to play. And so you've incorporated play, everything you've done, all the interventions, everything that you did to connect, to engage, to relate to your children, it was through play. And that's a perfect example of why we have to have recreation people in these parks and rec, and not depend on educators to provide services for kids when they're supposed to be playing. And I apologize to the educators. You're great. Your job right now is amazing. But when it comes to recreation, there's a huge difference between education and recreation, and parks and recreation is recreation. I'll be quiet.
No, good words, good words.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, Shelly, you saw that, like, you were using so many recreational things to de-escalate situations. And, when you were waiting in line and playing those games, like, you were on it. You're such a great addition to our field and kind of what we're doing. So I love it. I think it's wonderful.
Before I was even in this major.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before I found this quote actually yesterday, and I didn't have a chance to throw it into the PowerPoint, but I saw this. This is from a principal. Her name is Amy Fast. I saw this on Facebook, but she has a quote. She says, hard conversations don't have to be mean conversations. They don't have to take on a detached or authoritarian tone. Holding people to their greatness is perhaps one of the most loving actions we can take. Real accountability isn't a gotcha, it's an I see you. And I loved that. And I kind of wanted to throw that into this, but I found it yesterday, so it was too late. But I thought that was kind of a thing that kind of ties into this whole inclusion and stuff like this too. I liked that a lot. And I have like, play is the highest form of learning. That's kind of my motto. That's always been me from a long time. I'm the jokester in the group here, so always. Imagine that, Dan.
Yeah. Well, then you're in the right field. Okay, in the chat box, Leanne says, sometimes that grief is felt multiple times a year when meds aren't renewed, clinical trials are denied, milestones are missed. Yes, we all touched on that.
These all for me. Oh, don't worry.
And these things, some things in school, your treatment by school districts is really dependent on the school district and who's in charge and their sensitivity to these types of matters. And I'm sorry you got such a less than ideal situation there, Shelley. I know in my school,
It got better.
We tried to be we tried to sensitize ourselves to the parents. Having gone through a similar experience myself with my child, you catch on. Okay, I get an excellent presentation, some thank yous. I want to make sure that I give you a big thank you, Shelley. You can certainly get in touch with her at charris@dovertownship.org. Code phrase today is understanding. That's a word, I realize, and not a phrase. Don't shoot me down for it, but it's just the word. And please go to the SurveyMonkey site to get that NCTRC credit. Want to remind you, tomorrow we have another 5 o'clock session, and the session is escaping me. Britt, I don't know if you remember which one it is. And I do know Friday is a noon, again, with Fur for All about therapy animals, so that's great. Thursday is, becoming a manager or leader, right? It's, now I'm embarrassed.
Sorry, I was getting it together. I think tomorrow is with Catherine. It's tackling that imposter syndrome in recreation, how to go from an intern to a manager, branching out from that typical role. And we kind of touched base on it last night. She has her recreational therapy, her normal position, her typical position, and then she also runs a blog and has her own business as well. So she's going to be kind of touching base on all of those things. Super fun.
Yeah, it sounded like a real good session when I was talking with her about it. So we got 2 more big ones coming up, and don't forget the raffle. The raffle site is open. We're taking your bids, and it can all be found on the website for the TRVI. So
Can I throw one more thing in there when you said therapy animals?
yes.
So when we got a dog at home, our dog is 15 now. So yeah, Nick was like, no, I guess Nick was like 4, I guess, ish when we got the dog at home, and we saw changes at home. And when he went to middle school, when his placement at middle school, there was a therapy dog that he was in a therapeutic emotional support classroom, and there was a therapy dog in there for those 3 years. That was the change. As soon as we saw him in there with the therapy dog, anytime he had test anxiety, he could put his hand down, the dog would come over and he could pet the dog. We saw more change with him. And that 6th grade year, starting 6th grade through 8th grade. And then by the time he got into high school placement, he could do a lot of those things on his own. Like that helped him learn how to regulate, de-escalate and everything like that. Dogs are amazing.
Yeah, I think dogs are one of those things that we all know, dogs and animals in general are one of those tools that we all know intuitively. And, they spend a lot of money on research just to point it out that we were right all along. Yes, please stay tuned for that Friday session. I put the link to the TRI site in the chat box if you want to go and look at the raffles and baskets and bid on them.
And then Dan, did you want, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just saw the last chat about a therapy dog having therapy dog calling hours in a funeral home. Again, things we already know.
Definitely. Dan, did you want to mention just giving people a heads up for next year?
Oh, yes, the TRI will be live next year. So we want you to come home. State College, this time in October of 2022. We'll give you the dates and we'll give you a save the date on that one. Okay. Thanks, Britt.
Yeah, we would love to see all of you in person next year. I'm really excited. As much fun as virtual is, we're way more fun in person, I think.
Yes, we
So,
are. I will do a
Definitely.
song and dance for everyone if they come.
And the ice cream, right? The creamery. There's the
Yep.
ice cream at State College and